Leonard woke that morning with the feeling that something inside him had broken during the night. The mansion was too silent, as if even the walls knew of the sentence hanging in the air. The doctors had been clear, cold, too technical for pain of that magnitude. The twins were only 5 years old. 5. And yet, lupus was advancing aggressively, stealing strength, color, future. In the makeshift medical wing of the house, 2 small hospital beds occupied the space where a playroom had once stood. Tubes, monitors, and medicines replaced dolls and drawings on the walls. Diana and Abigail were breathing with difficulty, their faces too pale for such young children. Leonard stood at the door, unable to enter, watching every slightest movement, like someone guarding a flame about to go out. The girl's mother, Eleanor, sat on a sofa at the end of the hallway, hugging her knees. Her swollen eyes betrayed sleepless nights, but she rarely approached her daughters, not for lack of love, but for fear. Fear of looking, of touching, of accepting that the disease had won the control she always believed she had over everything. Since the diagnosis, Eleanor seemed to exist on the margins, like a silent shadow in that gigantic house. Lupus is attacking vital organs, the doctor had said hours earlier. We're doing everything we can, but their bodies are very weak. Leonard remembered every word like a cruel echo. He, who controlled companies, figures, and people, could no longer control time, nor pain, nor the fate of his own daughters. He approached Abigail's bed and held her small, cold hand. The girl opened her eyes with difficulty and whispered something almost inaudible. "Dad, I'm tired." Leonard swallowed hard, feeling his chest tighten like never before in his life. He had promised his wife, years ago, that he would protect their family. But there, faced with the twins' fragility, he realized he was losing the most important battle of all. That morning, the opulent mansion didn't feel like a home. It felt like a place waiting for the worst to happen. Staff walked in silence, doctors avoided eye contact, and Eleanor remained seated, distant, as if the world were going on without her. Leonard closed his eyes for a moment, unaware that in a few hours someone would cross that threshold and change everything, not with money, nor with medicine, but with something that house had forgotten: presence. Leonard Graham always believed that life worked like the businesses he built over decades. If something went wrong, all he had to do was invest more, hire the best people, and push until it worked. That's how he rose from nothing to become a respected, feared, and admired man. The world quickly learned that Leonard didn't accept losses. Except now, for the first time, all the power he had accumulated seemed useless in the face of 2 5-year-old children struggling to keep breathing. Since the twins' diagnosis, Leonard had barely slept. He spent his nights in his office at the mansion, surrounded by medical reports scattered across his desk, numbers that made no sense, graphs that only confirmed the inevitable. He read everything, researched everything, called specialists from other countries, offered absurd sums of money in exchange for impossible solutions. But all the answers ended the same way. The lupus was progressing too fast. Eleanor, his wife, had transformed into someone he barely recognized. Once elegant, active, always present in household decisions, she now spent hours locked in her room or sitting in silence, staring into space. Leonard had tried to talk to her, insisted, asked her to go to the girls, but Eleanor always backed away. She cried softly, saying she couldn't bear to see them like that. The love was there, but it was paralyzed by fear and a depression that deepened each day. Leonard was also afraid, but he dealt with it in the only way he knew how: control. He established strict rules within the mansion. No noise, no unnecessary visits, nothing that could destabilize the twins. The house became a sterile, cold space where even laughter seemed forbidden. Staff were frequently replaced, nurses quit, and any attempt at improvisation was immediately cut off by him. Despite this, there were times when Leonard allowed himself to falter. When he thought no one was watching, he would go into the girls' room and stand there, observing. Diana and Abigail no longer had the strength to play. Their toys remained untouched in boxes, like mementos of a life that seemed too distant. Leonard felt a silent guilt growing inside him, as if he had failed in the most basic mission of all. Being a father, one early morning, while watching his daughters struggling to sleep, Leonard realized something that frightened him even more than the illness. He was beginning to distance himself emotionally, just like Eleanor. Not from a lack of love, but from pain. The approaching end was causing him to create an invisible barrier, believing that this way he would suffer less when the worst happened. It was at that moment that he understood that House wasn't fighting for the twins' lives. It was simply waiting for the outcome. And unbeknownst to Leonard, this state of emotional abandonment would be precisely what would open the door for someone unexpected to enter, someone who had no money, no degrees, no authority. Just enough courage to challenge the silence of that mansion. The twins' condition worsened silently, almost imperceptibly to those outside the house. Diana began to have constant fevers, even with her medication adjusted daily. Abigail could barely sit for more than a few minutes, and her once curious eyes now always seemed tired, as if her body were begging for a permanent rest. The lupus advanced without permission, attacking joints, organs, and stealing what little energy remained. That week, 3 nurses resigned. None of them could stand the atmosphere of the mansion for more than a few days. It wasn't just the illness, it was the feeling of defeat that pervaded everything. The kitchen had stopped preparing complete children's meals. The toys were put away. The curtains remained closed almost all the time, as if daylight were too offensive for a house that had already accepted the worst. Eleanor rarely appeared. She spent long periods in her room, lying down, staring at the ceiling, drugged by sleeping pill. When she came downstairs, she stayed for only a few minutes, always away from her daughters. Leonard tried not to judge. He knew his wife was sinking into anticipatory grief, experiencing the pain even before the loss occurred. Still, each of her absences was another burden that fell on him, who had to support the entire household alone. One afternoon, Leonard heard Diana calling softly. He approached the bed, knelt beside his daughter, and held her hand. "Daddy," she whispered weakly, "will we get better?" Leonard felt the world stop. He knew how to lie in meetings, contracts, and negotiations, but there, in front of a 5-year-old child, he couldn't. He gently shook her hand and replied simply, "I'm here, my love. I'll always be here." Abigail watched in silence. Her teary eyes spoke volumes. Leonard realized then that his daughters weren't just fighting an autoimmune disease. They were fighting loneliness. They were fighting the feeling of being treated like terminal patients, not like living children. That night, Leonard gathered the household staff. The atmosphere was heavy. Doctors spoke in hushed tones. Employees avoided eye contact. It was then that Mrs. Carter, the head housekeeper, cleared her throat before speaking. "Sir, we need someone new, an au pair. The girls still need daily care, someone to stay with them." Leonard hesitated. All previous attempts had failed. Trained nannies gave up. Experienced nurses couldn't cope. He no longer believed anyone could make a difference. "I don't want false hope," he replied curtly, "nor someone who will leave in 2 days." Mrs. Carter nodded slowly. "This one is different," he said. "She's young, Spanish, 23 years old. She doesn't have medical training, but she insists she knows how to deal with sick children." Leonard let out a short, humorless laugh. "No medical training? Then why did you come?" The housekeeper paused before replying. "He said that some promises don't need a resume." Silence filled the room. Leonard didn't answer. He didn't authorize it. He didn't refuse. He simply turned towards the hallway where his daughter's room was. He couldn't explain it, but something about that sentence deeply bothered him. Perhaps because, deep down, he knew that everything he had tried up to that point had failed. And without anyone in that house being able to foresee it, the following morning, a young woman would walk through that door carrying only a simple suitcase, a foreign accent, and the courage that no one else there had to face what was to come. The morning was gray when the mansion gate opened to welcome someone new. There was no fanfare, no expectation, only the distant sound of footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The young woman walked with a simple suitcase in her hands, a firm posture, and attentive gaze. Her name was Brenda Alvarez, 23-year-old Spanish woman, with a soft accent and a calmness that contrasted sharply with the tension that dominated the place. There was no luxury in her clothes, nor haste in her movements. She seemed present. Mrs. Carter was the first to evaluate her with the critical eye of someone who had seen many give up. "You know what you're getting into, don't you?" he asked bluntly. "This house doesn't need someone fragile." Brenda nodded slowly. "I know exactly what I'm getting into," he replied calmly. "That's why I'm here." The housekeeper sighed, as if she already knew how the story ended, and pointed to the hallway. "The girls are very weak. Trained nurses didn't last 2 days." Brenda listened to everything in silence. She observed the surroundings, the pictures on the walls, the heavy air, the absence of laughter. As she walked down the hallway, she noticed something that deeply disturbed her. Closed doors, thick curtains blocking out the light, toys stored away as if they had never belonged to that house. It was a place that had prepared to lose, not to fight. Leonard was in the office when he was notified of the new au pair's arrival. He didn't get up. "Tell her that the medical wing is restricted," he replied, without emotion. "My daughters need silence." When Brenda entered the room, Leonard didn't even look up from his reports. "I'm not interested in promises," he said coldly. "Do your job, follow the rules, and don't get your hopes up." Brenda stood in front of him for a few seconds, just long enough to force him to look at her. "With all due respect, sir," he said with controlled firmness, 5-year-old children need more than just silence. They need someone who still sees them as alive." The sentence came as a shock. Leonard felt anger rising immediately. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she retorted. "My daughters are dying." Brenda's gaze did not waver. "I know what it's like to lose someone to an illness that no one can control," he replied softly. "But I also know that giving up before the end is another form of death." Silence fell between them. Leonard asked nothing more. He didn't want to hear. He didn't want to feel. He turned his back and said only, "Do whatever you want, as long as you don't get in the way." Minutes later, Brenda stood before the twins' room. 2 small beds, beeping machines, the smell of medicine and fear. She took a deep breath before entering, as if asking permission from her own heart. She approached slowly, knelt beside Diana, and gently touched her face, without gloves, without haste. The girl opened her eyes with difficulty. "Who are you?" he whispered. Brenda smiled slightly. "I am someone who came to stay." Abigail stirred her head on the pillow. "Are you leaving too?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Brenda felt her chest tighten, but she replied firmly, "No, I'm not leaving." At that moment, something imperceptible happened. Not on the monitors, not in the reports, but in the air of the room. For the first time in weeks, the girls were not being observed as terminal patients, but as children who still existed. Outside, Leonard watched from a distance, uneasy, conflicted, unable to explain why that young woman without diplomas disturbed him so much. He didn't know it yet, but at that exact moment, the routine of death had been broken. That first night, Brenda didn't try to change anything that could be seen as an explicit rule. She didn't touch the equipment, didn't question medications, didn't discuss protocols. She just stayed. She sat between the 2 beds, on the cold floor, leaning against the wall, as if that were the most natural place in the world. The twins slept restlessly, moaning softly, waking every few minutes, trapped in a cycle of pain and fear that had already lasted for weeks. When Diana opened her eyes in the middle of the night, she found someone there. Not a hurried nurse, nor an adult with pity in their eyes. She found Brenda alert, awake, as if she had been waiting for her. "Are you still here?" the girl murmured. "I am," Brenda replied in soft Spanish, before correcting herself to English. "And I'm going to stay." Abigail stirred uncomfortably in the other bed. Brenda stood slowly, pulled up a chair, and sat between the 2, reaching out her hand. She didn't touch them immediately. She waited. She gave them time to allow it. When their small hands reached for hers, she held them carefully, feeling the faint tremor of their tiny bodies. "You can rest," he whispered. "I'll stand guard." The next morning, Leonard woke with a strange feeling. The house was still silent, but not with that heavy, definitive silence. It was a different kind of silence, as if something were suspended. As he walked down the hallway of the medical wing, he noticed that the curtains were slightly open. A sliver of light streamed into the girl's room. He frowned, uneasy, but didn't go in. Brenda had opened the door just enough for the day to exist within. Sitting beside the bed, she gently combed Diana's sparse hair with an almost ceremonial delicacy, as if the gesture were sacred. "You're tickling me," the girl complained in a whisper. "So, you mean you still feel it?" Brenda replied, smiling. "That's good." Abigail watched in silence. "Do you sing?" he asked suddenly. Brenda hesitated for a second, then nodded. "I sing badly," he warned. "But I really sing." And it wasn't an upbeat song, nor a sad one. It was something simple, almost childlike, in Spanish, with a soft melody that didn't compete with the beeping of the machines. The girls slowly closed their eyes. For the first time in days, they slept without any jolts. Outside, Mrs. Carter stopped in the hallway, surprised to find that no one was calling for help. No one was crying. No one was screaming. It was as if the room were protected by an invisible bubble. She didn't go in. She just walked on in silence, carrying with her the strange feeling that something was changing. Leonard, observing everything from a distance, felt irritation mixed with confusion. This made no sense. It wasn't treatment. It wasn't science. And yet, something within him resisted the idea of stopping. Perhaps because, for the first time in weeks, his daughters didn't seem to be waiting for death. They seemed to be resting that night, as he turned off the hallway lights. Leonard heard Brenda whisper something almost imperceptible inside the room. "I promised you wouldn't be alone." He didn't know to whom that promise had been made. But, without realizing it, for the first time since the diagnosis, he left the door open. The following morning, something small, almost imperceptible, caught the attention of the nurse on duty. The twins had slept through the entire night without seizures. No fever, no emergency calls. The monitors were still there, but the numbers no longer screamed immediate danger. Brenda didn't celebrate. She simply continued with the silent routine she had created, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Leonard was informed during breakfast. He listened, nodded, and was suspicious. He had seen false improvements before. Still, when he entered the room and saw Diana sitting, propped up on pillows, looking out the open window, something tightened in his chest. Abigail was holding a pencil and trying to draw. It wasn't much, but it was life. The doctor came that same day. She examined the girls in silence, reviewed the test results, and ordered new tests. "This is not common in cases like theirs," he finally admitted. "Lupus usually progresses. It doesn't recede like this." Leonard crossed his arms, then explained. She took a deep breath. "I can't, but whatever it is, ... Don't interrupt." From the side of the room, Brenda simply watched, not with victory, with responsibility, like someone who knows it's not over yet. 2 days later, Brenda did something no one expected. She asked permission to take the girls to the garden. The reaction was immediate. Denial, fear, medical arguments. Leonard almost screamed. "They are too fragile." Brenda replied calmly and firmly. "They're already fragile in here too. The difference is that there's still sun outside." Finally, he gave in, not out of conviction, but out of exhaustion. The twins were placed in chairs, wrapped in blankets. When they felt the light breeze on their faces, Diana smiled. Abigail closed her eyes. Brenda knelt beside them, pointing to flowers, insects, the sky. Leonard watched from a distance, his heart racing. That garden, once merely decorative, now seemed like a territory of resistance. That same night, Abigail had a seizure, a severe one, sudden. Alarms sounded. Panic returned. Leonard rushed in. Eleanor appeared for the first time in days, trembling. Brenda was the first to act, keeping the girls conscious, talking to them, holding their hands. "Stay with me," she repeated. "You are not alone." When the crisis subsided, the silence that followed was not one of defeat, it was one of survival. And there, in the midst of the chaos, Eleanor finally approached her daughters. Crying, touching them carefully, like someone waking from a nightmare that had lasted too long. Days later, tests confirmed what no one dared say aloud. The twins' condition had stabilized. They weren't cured, but they weren't dying either. Treatment would continue, the road would be long, but death had receded. Leonard called Brenda into his office. "What did you do?" she asked, without harshness. "Be honest." Brenda took a deep breath before answering. "I've already lost a child to an autoimmune disease," she confessed. "I promised myself that if I had another chance, I wouldn't let fear steal the time I still have left." Leonard remained silent for a few seconds after Brenda's confession. The office, always so controlled, seemed too small for everything that had been said there. He asked no more questions. He simply nodded slightly, as if finally understanding something he had been avoiding for a long time. Brenda stood up, ready to leave, but stopped at the door. There was something else, something she had been carrying since the previous night. She turned slowly, her voice a little lower, more respectful. "Mr. Graham, may I ask you something?" Leonard looked up, attentive. "It depends on what it is." Brenda took a deep breath. "Last night, while I was helping the girls to sleep, they told me about a dream they've had since before they got sick." She paused briefly, choosing her words carefully. "They said they always imagined their 6th birthday in the garden of their house, out here, with sunshine, flowers, and a cake full of butterflies." Leonard felt a tightening in his chest. The garden, that space he almost never frequented, always seen only as scenery. "Brenda," she began, already anticipating the fear. "You know, they're fragile, that any effort." "I know," she interrupted gently. "I'm not talking about a big party, or noise, or guests. Just ... allowing them to fulfill that dream, even if it's for a short time, even if it's simple." Silence settled between them again. Leonard glanced out the office window, overlooking the perfectly manicured but empty garden. For a moment, he imagined his daughters out there, not as patients, but as children. He felt fear, rising, cruel, immediate, the fear of creating a memory that could become a farewell. "What if it's too much for them?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "And what if it isn't?" Brenda replied with the same calm. "What if that's exactly what they need right now? Something to look forward to, something beautiful." Leonard closed his eyes for a second. He thought about how many times he had postponed everything. Trips, moments, promises. Always believing there would be time later. When everything was resolved. When the illness was under control. And now, time was exactly what he wasn't sure he had. "They were talking about butterflies, ... double quotes," he murmured. Brenda smiled, for the first time in that conversation. "They said the cake needed to have lots of butterflies, because butterflies symbolize transformation." Leonard felt his throat tighten. He opened his eyes and looked at Brenda again. "Do it," he said finally, "but carefully. With all possible care." Brenda didn't celebrate. She didn't smile broadly. She simply nodded, moved, like someone receiving something sacred. "Thank you for not taking that dream away from them," she replied. When Brenda left the office, Leonard remained seated, motionless. For the first time since the diagnosis, he wasn't making a decision to avoid pain. He was making a decision to allow life, and, without knowing it, that simple request, a birthday party in the garden, a cake full of butterflies, would be the most difficult and courageous step he would take as a father. Brenda didn't tell the twins immediately. She waited for the right moment, when they were both awake, less tired, sharing the same peaceful silence they had learned to trust. She sat between the beds, as she always did, and carefully held their 2 small hands. "I spoke with your father today," she said softly. "I told him about your dream." Diana frowned, curious. "What dream?" "The garden party," Brenda replied, smiling. "The 6th birthday." with a cake covered in butterflies. For a moment, neither of them reacted. Abigail squeezed Brenda's fingers tightly, as if she were afraid to hear the rest. "Did he let you?" she asked, almost voicelessly. Brenda nodded. He left. The room filled with something that hadn't been there for a long time. It wasn't euphoria, it was hope. Diana smiled slowly, as if relearning how to smile. Abigail let out a short, fragile, but genuine laugh. "Real butterflies?" Diana asked. "As many as you want," Brenda replied. That night, the twins had trouble sleeping, not from pain, but from their imaginations. They talked about the dress they wanted to wear, the colors of the cake, the sun shining on their faces. Brenda listened to everything, memorizing every detail, as if it were a sacred request. Outside, Leonard walked down the hallway and heard the low, excited voices. He stopped. He didn't go in. But, for the first time, he didn't feel afraid listening to his daughter's dream. The following days were a quiet preparation. Nothing grand, nothing flashy, just the essentials. Brenda drew butterflies with the girls, cut out colored paper, and chose flowers from their own garden. Eleanor watched everything from a distance, torn between grief and something new that was beginning to emerge. The day before the party, she approached the room and, for the first time in weeks, sat beside her daughters. She didn't say much, she just stayed, and that was all. On the morning of the birthday, the garden seemed different. Not because it had changed, but because it was being seen in a different way. A simple table, a light tablecloth, light balloons tied to the branches. The cake, in the center, covered with small, colorful butterflies. When the twins were taken outside, they wrapped themselves in thin blankets, the sun gently touching their faces. "It's true, ... double quotes, Abigail whispered. "It's ours," Diana added. Leonard knelt before them when they arrived at the table. He knelt not out of weakness, but out of love. "Happy birthday, my butterflies," she said, her voice faltering. The candles were lit. The two closed their eyes together. They didn't ask for healing. They asked to stay, to play, to feel the wind once more. When they blew them out, a respectful silence filled the garden, followed by a restrained, emotional applause. Eleanor wept silently, holding Leonard's hand. Brenda watched from the sidelines, her heart full and at peace. Time passed. There were no instant miracles. There were difficult days, relapses, long nights. But something had changed forever. The twins were no longer just sick children. They were living children, surrounded by presence, love, and courage. The treatment continued. The struggle went on. And, little by little, life found its place. Months later, the garden still had butterflies. Some made of paper, others real. Diana and Abigail, stronger now, ran slowly among the flowers. Eleanor laughed again. Leonard had learned to let go of the remote to hold small hands. Brenda left when she felt her mission was complete. On the day of her departure, Diana ran to her. "Are you leaving now?" Brenda crouched down to the same level. "I will," he replied. "But everything you needed to learn, you already know." When the gate closed, Leonard finally understood. Money didn't save his daughters. Fear almost killed them. But love, the kind that dares to dream, even when it hurts, that's what remained. And in the garden of that wealthy family, where before there had only been silence, butterflies continued to land, because some stories don't end with a conclusion. They end with life happening again. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment saying what moved you the most. Sometimes, a simple presence changes everything, and perhaps this story was a sign for you today. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with stories that remind us what really matters when everything seems difficult.